Welcome back. We're going to be discussing more of Dark, so again, if you have not watched Dark, please go and watch it, for there will be spoilers. And if you haven't watched the previous 2 episodes about Dark that I have released, go and check those out on my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the loop of Dark. Basically, what we've talked about a little bit previously is that these 2 realities, Adam's reality and Eve's reality, are intrinsically tied together and are deterministic. So the loop happens because a certain series of events in time travel happen to perpetuate it forever. So that's why getting out of the loop is so tricky. And we can see that in the show, we are witnessing the final loop that occurs. So the end of the loops, the way that they wrap around on each other, is really tricky because we don't actually see how the end of the loop typically plays out. Because if we did, we would just see the whole cycle repeat itself again. And instead of that, Claudia did appear to Adam at the end, and Adam made the decision to go and change the reality so that the loops could be broken. So normally some other event happens in that case, and we don't really know what that is. But here is how the end of the loops theoretically happens. The driving force behind a lot of decisions that happen in these 2 realities comes from the motivations of Adam and Eve, also known as Jonas and Alt Martha. Jonas necessarily wants to end the loops, destroy the knot, and find paradise, which can be thought of as kind of the metaphorical afterthought of the universe and end the suffering of everybody in the loops. Basically, who wants to destroy the universe so that nobody can suffer any longer. Marta wants to preserve the loops to protect her son, the unknown, from Adam. This prolongs the suffering of everybody in the loops, but her son does survive and lives out his life. Adam's method for ending the loops is to kill Alt Martha and her unborn son, with the use of the God particle, which is kind of a time travel device in itself, and we'll go over that in a later episode. In a nutshell, the God particle has the power to unwrite a fixed, determined point in time by killing the thing that would have started everything else. He is successful in killing her, but finds in dismay that this does not make all of the loops end and make him cease to exist. Instead, Claudia comes to him and proposes the correct solution. While the show never reveals the continuation of the loops from this point on, it's believed that Claudia always visits him in this situation and gets him to kill Eve, which results in a younger Alt Martha witnessing the death and swearing revenge on Adam, turning her into Eve. Speaking of which, Eve's goal is to ensure the loops always happen, which means she needs a method that will always result in the loops continuing. This method can be compared to the Schrodinger's cat experiment, and we'll do that comparing in a later episode, but the important thing is that one reality can branch into 2 realities existing simultaneously. In the first reality, Alt Martha rescues Jonas from the apocalypse and takes him to the end of the world. This version of Alt Martha, acting under the orders of Adam, returns to him and is eventually killed by him. Jonas, at the end of Eve's reality, leads a younger Alt Martha down the path that leads to Jonas's death, and she returns to his world to save him once again. But the next time she goes, Bartos interferes and stops her from rescuing Jonas, as it was all a part of Eve's plan to do so. Jonas survives the apocalypse and spends the next 33 years with Claudia trying to make the God particle work and get them back in time again. Meanwhile, Alt Martha returns to her world, is given a nasty scar, and proceeds to kill Jonas, give birth to the unknown, and become Eve. And thus, we have the cyclical nature to these loops. 2 possible starts, with one becoming Eve's reality and the other one becoming Adam's. They continue side by side as Eve's coalition interact with Adam's reality to make it so the cycle will continue again. We also, of course, have Claudia. Her motivation is to save her daughter Regina from death. While it doesn't explain a lot of her traveling through time to try to find answers for this, it appears that she is searching for these answers many times over and usually comes short of preventing the loops from happening over again. She finds that the loops are so deterministic that nothing inside the loops causes the loops, but rather an event in another world outside of the loops, the origin reality, is setting everything off. And thus, to destroy the loop would mean reverting to the fact that the origin reality and that the other two realities should never have existed. She further deduces the origin of these realities being H.G. Tannhaus and his desire to bring back his family, and she finds the moment that changes must be made in order for the deterministic nature of the loops to change. The last cycle is where she finds all of these things out, and thus she is able to set the necessary things in motion to end the loops once and for all. The thing I find the most fascinating about talking about Dark and the loop that is caused by these actions of the characters in the story is that the real complexity of the loops comes down to the fact that two different loops are happening. There are two different realities, two different possible futures and timelines that they could go along. And then everything kind of reverts back to what we witness throughout the entire show. So there's a whole history, a whole character development in another reality where people are living out their lives and developing these theories for how to get out of the loops, but in the end just end up perpetuating them. And the other fascinating thing about this is that everything must have been determined at the moment that these realities were created. Because, as we've discussed before, if any of these events wouldn't have happened, then the system wouldn't be deterministic and the loops wouldn't have perpetuated themselves. It's also possible that there really wasn't a loop per se where this was happening any number of times, and that all the events that happen just happen, and that when the universe was created, it was created with this history of all of these characters doing these actions. And then what we see is the one play out of these events. And that's also possible, that all of these events always happen and that Claudia always comes to this realization at the end, but that there is a deterministic version of her that sets Adam on a different path at the end instead of setting him on the right path. And it's so fascinating to think about these things because this is probably the best example of a deterministic loop in any sort of medium that I've ever seen, in the respect that it can still be broken and that you're not stuck looping forever and ever. Dark is super fascinating in that aspect, and that's really why I love this show so much and I want to talk about it, is because there's so much to unpack about determinism and time loops and all of these different paradoxes that play out just perfectly to cause this to happen. And then how the whole show wraps up as though this was all intentional and that Tannhaus planned this all along or something like that. You know, like by some grand design, the universe turned out like this, and it's just sort of beautiful. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this talk about Dark. I will be continuing my talk about Dark with the next episode. We're going to dive more into the Schrödinger paradox and the alternate universes and quantum entanglement, things like that. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening.